I really want to thank everybody who's joining us today. Todd, I think you just started recording. Is that right? Excellent. Thank you. We have Senator Thatcher here to introduce the Legislative Policy and Research Office, who's done some work on her request for the PRAC. But just before we get to that, we need to approve the agenda, and I have a couple items I'd like to add to it. So do we have a quorum here? Let's see.
No, we don't.
Not yet.
We need one more. We need either Steve or Michael.
So we need 5 of us, and we have 4.
No, wait, no, we need 4 of us.
Senator Thatcher is right, not a voting member.
Right.
Steve, looks like Steve is here. Is Steve not here?
Oh, I don't know. Are you here, Steve?
No. Okay. Sorry, I see an SS in the people who are attending, and I thought that might be.
No, that is our soon-to-be new member, Scott Stauffer.
Oh, fantastic! Now we'll have 2 SSs. Okay. Great. Well, if let's jump ahead then just to maybe do some business that doesn't need a quorum, which is introducing our nominated members who may or may not join the Legislative Subcommittee, but we of course certainly hope you will. Let's see, Scott Stauffer is here. Hi, welcome.
Howdy, everyone. Good to meet you. My name is Scott, and I'm the city recorder for the city of Milwaukee, suburb of Portland, and glad to be here. Very honored to be nominated and look forward to that process.
And obviously a big Beaver fan.
Actually, I know I'm wearing a duck, but I actually went to Oregon State and I grew up a duck. So I'm firmly in the platypus camp, which I know is controversial, but yeah, the duck's here. Yeah.
We have to overcome lots of controversy on this commission. So you're bringing all your experience. It's great. We're really, really glad to have you as a nominee and look forward to your confirmation and your participating. And then thanks so much for taking the time out today to just come, to get up to speed. And Emily Goddard is also here, I think. Is that right? Hi, welcome. Looking forward to having you join as a full member of the PRAC. And, if we can recruit you both to the Legislative Subcommittee, that would be thrilling. But would you mind saying hello and introducing yourself a bit?
Yes, I'm Emily Gothard, and I'm a paralegal at SEIU Local 503, also a former public employee from Portland State University.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming as a nominee to get up to speed on this stuff, and we're really excited to have you join the council as well. I am just texting a couple members to see if they're coming. Let's see. You guys, I'm not we can't approve the agenda without a quorum. The changes, I can tell folks what I'd like to change it to, and then we can jump into listening, since this is basically we're not going to be making decisions today. But I would like to add to, is that okay? Does that follow protocol, Todd?
I was just going to ask you, I'd like to introduce my deputy first.
Oh my gosh, I totally forgot. Thank you so much. Yes, very exciting.
Well, then it gives me great pleasure to introduce Fang Lowe, Oregon's new Deputy Public Records Advocate. She started on Monday, just got her computer and phone, so I hope you'll be gentle on her. No public records questions yet, but I'll give her a moment to introduce herself.
Can folks hear me?
Yes.
There we go. Hi, I'm Fang, and literally I just got my email to work about 20 minutes ago, but I'm still using my own email for our purposes today. And I'm glad to be a part of this process, and I'm here today to listen to what folks have to say and just get started.
That's great. Wow, Fang, we're so excited to have you in the Public Records Advocate's office. It's fantastic. And your email challenges, hopefully they'll be the hardest things you'll have to deal with this whole time. We shall see. Anyway, it's really great to have you on board. Thank you very much. Are there any other bits of things we can do before there's Shasta. Hi, Shasta. I wish you were a member of the subcommittee because we're looking for a quorum, but but we're going to get started anyway. Shasta is a member of our full Public Records Advisory Council. So one thing I just want to let folks know I'd like to add to the agenda when we do get a quorum is just to spend a little time after we hear from LPRO talking about next steps as we're coming to the end of our our testimony from various experts on, what to do about fees, and want to talk about how to shift into, putting this into action and getting some ideas for potential legislation onto paper. So hopefully we can approve that and stick around a little bit longer after the LPRO presentation. But I would like to turn it over now to Senator Kim Thatcher, who was kind enough to make a request to the Legislative Policy and Research Office to check out what other states are doing statutorily as far as fees go. And yeah, may I hand it to you, Senator Thatcher, to just give a brief introduction?
Well, you kind of already said it, but what happened is we had these questions earlier on when we were meeting about what we wanted to tackle next, and fees were one of those things. So I suggested maybe, using the resources available to legislative members, and that would be the legislative, the LPRO. I don't know why it always, the pro part eludes me when I need it, but they're the people who research and look into and report on topics for legislators. And this was one of them. And it looks like Elliot Crafton, as well as Melissa Leone, worked on these questions that we as the Public Records Council came up with. So I really want them to, I'm sure they can explain all the things that they found and came up with, because they did, it looks like, an extensive amount of work looking into things. And I think we'll have a pile of things to sort through. It's not going to be easier, but I think we'll have some ideas at least to kind of take off from. So at that, I don't know who is prepared to speak, but from LPRO, but I would turn it over to them at this point.
Thank you, Senator. And yeah, Melissa or Elliot, thank you for joining us very much. Melissa, were you going to get going? I know we did pass around to members of this subcommittee the report that you prepared late yesterday, and I believe that will be part of the record that will get posted from this meeting. But thank you both for being here. And Melissa, would you like to get started?
I'll interrupt real quick. They gave it to me a lot earlier in the week, and I was swamped and missed it. So that's what happened. It was my bad that it got to you so late. So there you go. Oh,
that was not meant as any type of reprimand at all. It was great.
No, great time. I wanted to make the record straight. They were great. So anyway, thank you.
Super. Yes, sorry about that. Thank you very much. And yeah, Melissa.
So thank you, Senator Thatcher and Emily. Yes, I'll start first, and then I'll summarize our findings, and then I'll turn it over to Elliot Crafton. We now have a couple of research analysts at LPRO. He's one of our new folks there, and he'll describe our methodology and the limitations of this research, and then we'll happily answer member questions afterwards. So to start off, just as a reminder, Senator Thatcher asked the Legislative Policy and Research Office to first identify how public records laws, also known as open records laws or Freedom of Information Acts, authorize or otherwise address fees for records requests. Second, how they provide for public interest or other fee waivers or reductions. And third, how they require or allow itemized cost estimates and advance fee payments. We were also asked to identify any common patterns and to provide other information that might be useful to the PRAC. So we found that the statutory authorities and requirements for charging fees and authorizing waivers vary widely by state, right? Although some common themes emerged within the fee waiver or other language, identifying a couple of common state approaches was not possible. So for example, one common theme for fees that most states have is general statutory language authorizing a public body to charge fees for public records requests. It's often language around allowing reasonable fees or actual costs, right? In addition to this general language, states may explicitly authorize fees in the categories that you requested in that memo, including for duplication or reproduction of records. We found that 20 states have per page fees set in statute. 3 states specify digital copy fees in their statute. 22 states have statutes authorizing fees for general staff time or labor. And then 23 states authorize search or retrieval fees. Sometimes there's some overlap. Sometimes those are different. Sometimes a state will just do labor. Sometimes it'll just do search or retrieval, and sometimes it does both, right? So we did count those separately. 11 states explicitly authorize fees for review or redaction of public records requests. And then 23 states allow fees for extensive data or information technology costs associated with a public records request. This even happens sometimes in states where all they allow is the reproduction of public records fees. This may sometimes can be the only other thing that they allow. We found that 6 states allow public bodies to charge for electronic data access. 11 states specify fees for electronic media, although that's often implied in the reproduction fees, but is specifically called out in those 11 states. And then 8 states have other fees for either certified copies, retrieval of offsite records held by a third party, transcription services, or for the offsite supervision for duplication of a public record. So those are kind of the distribution of what we found in terms of fees. For waivers or fee reductions, we found that 19 states have no explicit fee reduction or waiver provision in their statutes. So they don't talk about them at all. Of those that do, 23 states authorize waivers or fee reductions if the request is in the public interest, benefits the general welfare, or primarily benefits the public. And those are the 3 typically common languages that they use. However, most don't define what they mean by what's in the public interest. The memo does include examples from a few states that do have definitions of public interest, because we know that was of interest to you. So there's some examples there. In terms of other waivers or fee reductions, we found that 17 states explicitly exempt a certain number of hours or pages of copies before a public record fee may be assessed, or they set a fee threshold under which a public body may not charge the fee. And that's documented in the memo with the table. 6 states have waivers or reductions for indigent requesters, and they provide some associated definitions. 4 states waive fee requests for federal or veterans administration purposes. Similarly, 2 states have explicit provisions that waive fees for a person requesting their personal information. And then 2 states have explicit provisions that prohibit fees where cost to the public body to bill or collect the fee exceeds the fee to be charged. So in terms of information around media and how it's dealt with in statutes, we found explicit provisions around media in only 5 states, and those either had a specific definition or some specific reference that media use is not considered a commercial activity and may not be charged a certain fee. Interestingly, we found that media, when it's defined, is not always connected to public interest provisions or that definition. Now, what we can't say is whether the public record statutes, where media is defined differently, is, sorry, let me say that again. So what we don't know from the public record statutes, right? We looked at, and Elliot will talk about this. We don't know from those statutes whether states define media separately through their implementing policy, other regulation, or another statute. So those are just 5 states where it was within their public records statutes that we found definitions. So moving to estimates and advance payment provisions, we found that 17 states have provisions for public bodies to provide fee estimates or itemized cost breakdowns. 26 have provisions for advance payments or deposits. The estimate and payment statutes have various forms and different triggering mechanisms, which we list in the memo. Some states require an estimate to be generated for all requests, often as part of the standard response that's required within so many days after a public body receives a request. In other states, those triggers are either by the number of hours required to complete the request or the cost to produce the response. Advance payment requirements also have similar triggers, such as when the estimated cost of the research exceeds a specified threshold, or most commonly when a requester has a history of non-payment, or a number of those statutes. Many states require public records custodians, whether they're state agencies or other public bodies, to formally establish public records policies or adopt regulations. We only identified 15 states with a requirement to establish some sort of policy specific to fees or waivers. Most of those requirements for policies are more general and are about process, not setting fees or necessarily requiring a policy around when a waiver is to be granted or how much a waiver should be granted. So not many statutes specify how much a reduction is to happen. So we couldn't tell from the statutes if a statute authorized a fee reduction for public interest, is that 10%? Is that 50%? Is it 75%? Unless it's a complete waiver, we couldn't tell from statutes what that reduction ends up being. So that's sort of a summary of what we found. I'm going to turn over to Elliot to talk about our methodology and limitations piece. And I realized, just sort of for the record, that I didn't introduce myself, and that I'm Melissa Leone and I'm with the Legislative Policy and Research Office.
Thanks, Melissa. I'm Elliot Crafton. I'm also with the Legislative Policy and Research Office. I'm a legislative research analyst, as was mentioned earlier. So I'm going to take the next few minutes to briefly describe the methodology we use to identify public record laws for all 50 states and the District of Columbia. This information, it can be found in the memo when you have access to the memo on pages 3 through 5. So the first phase of this project was to determine what, if any, existing research was available. And I know when the request was provided to us, it identified a couple of resources. We wanted to see if there were other resources as well. So we found that several entities, including nonprofits and media organizations, as well as academic researchers, have expressed interest in how public records are accessed. To further this, we completed an internet search to identify resources, as well as a search of academic databases. We identified several resources, a subset of which are listed in the memorandum, but most approached public records laws generally, rather than focusing on the specific areas of fees, waivers, or itemized receipts. But while they did not necessarily speak to what we were looking into, they did provide a useful way to identify the public record statutes for each state and DC. Now, these citations varied a little bit between resources, so we did have to reconcile a bit of differences. But in the end, we were able to find the core public records law for each state and the District of Columbia. We then identified the state provided link to that text. So we were looking for the most official, up-to-date text, because as you all know, when you're looking at laws, it's very easy to find ones that are out of date or ones that have not yet actually been implemented. But so we found the official websites for all of these. We then collated the statutory language for all 50 states and DC, which amounted to just over 1,000 pages of text between all of the laws. Obviously, not all 1,000 pages were relevant, but they were all kind of included within the larger umbrella of public records laws. Unfortunately, we didn't have the time or resources to fully analyze all 1,000 pages of text that we identified. So we had to come up with a way to streamline the process. And we opted to use keywords to identify sections that would be potentially relevant. The keywords that we used were various forms of fee, cost, waive, waiver, reduce. And basically, we just did a text search identifying where these words showed up in the various statutes, so that we can then identify the sections that were potentially relevant, which we could then further analyze to pull out the relevant sections. And those were what led to the findings that Melissa described earlier. There were a number of limitations, which Melissa also alluded to when we were doing this research. As I mentioned, it was a lot of text to go through, 1,000 pages. And because we used the keyword process for identifying relevant sections, we potentially missed sections that didn't use those keywords. So as you can imagine, fees, costs can be addressed using that language, but they can also be addressed using other language that may not have been captured with those keywords. We caught a couple of those instances just as we were skimming through the language, but it's very possible that we may have missed other instances. Waive, reduce, similarly, itemize costs, they become tricky, and states are very creative in the way that they refer to concepts very often. The next piece that I will talk about is that, as again, Melissa alluded to, we looked at the core public records laws, or the primary statutes that authorize public records access via the custodians. But very often, other statutes and laws affect how custodians may provide access to public records. So these can be included in agency-specific authorities, or authorities that are not immediately obvious as public records laws. And those were not captured in what we were able to analyze for this project. We really focused on those core public records laws, freedom of information laws, open access laws. But if there were relevant statutory authorities that were embedded elsewhere, we may have missed those. And that could be that a specific agency has authority to charge in some instances, but not others, or has a cap on what they can charge. That may have been missed. Some states have tried to reconcile the fact that these laws may be amended outside of the public records law, but again, that was beyond the scope of this project. And then finally, we were somewhat limited in where we could go after identifying these laws, and where once we found the clauses that provided authority, we couldn't really identify what laws could be good models for where to go with the Oregon public records law, because we weren't really able to identify what the specific goal was. So where we were able to summarize and look for commonalities, we weren't really able to do anything more than that. At the end of the memo, there is a table with links to all 50 states and DC public records laws. So those are hyperlinks. It may not be readily obvious that they're hyperlinks, but if you're scrolling over them, hopefully you'll be able to click through. And from those, you can certainly find all of the exact language that is available out there to use going forward. So with that, I think I've summarized the methodology and limitations, and I'll pass it back to Melissa.
So thank you, Elliot. The only thing I was going to add is that it's just to reemphasize that the memo provides a lot of detail that we're not summarizing today. We include examples of statutory language from other states to show the diversity of the laws, or to highlight a state with some unique language. But I just want to be clear that that inclusion of that state language does not mean that these are recommendations from LPRO, or that they're somehow better examples. They were just illustrative examples of a concept or a certain type of fee or waiver that we were trying to describe in that section. And lastly, as Elliot has said, just because we didn't find, those overall kind of common themes, because there was such diversity. And so we really didn't identify a model for potential amendments to Oregon's public records laws on fees or waivers. And I know that was asked of us, but what we really found is that there are just lots of different options. And so I think, as Emily pointed out, the next step, I think, is for all of you to sort of digest that and be able to use our research as a reference as you're thinking about your options. Happy to answer questions, to try and dive into a certain amount of things. Just the caveat that, the detail is in the memo, which will hopefully be a reference to all of you, and that we may not be able to answer a specific question because I did skim 1,100 pages of, statutory text, and it hasn't all stuck, and I don't remember all those details. So we'll try our best to answer questions, but may often just suggest you look at a certain section in the memo. And I guess lastly, Emily and I talked about this briefly, I think that was yesterday. We looked at statutes, right? And that sometimes statute and implementation are different. And that I think even you've had presentations that under Oregon statute that different public bodies implement it differently. And so again, we're just looking at the statutory language, how that gets implemented, maybe a different conversation that you have with folks from these states, and that we can't really provide for you here today.
Great. Wow. Thank you really very much, Elliot and Melissa, both of you. I've been reading the memo since getting it, and there's a lot of really interesting detail, even though, you know, it's a shame no like perfect, you know, public records law dealing with fees emerged from the PAC. It looks to me, and I'd like to just, you know, if you feel like you comfortable, you know, weighing in on this, it looks to me like a great resource just to get a feel of what's out there, and if something is intriguing to us, a lead to dig in, taking your point, you know, with great seriousness that practice and statute can often differ. But I'm just wondering if either of you would have a comment on how you see this as a best resource, all this good work that you've done.
I think I see it the way you just described it, right? Which is that is, as you sort of synthesize, I haven't been able to participate in meetings the last couple of months between session, and then I've spent a couple of Fridays reading other state statutes lately. But, you know, you have heard from some other states and state agencies. So as you're thinking of the sort of the different elements, I hope that this will be a good resource for you to go back and look at, oh, well, this is how other states deal with either setting a threshold, or maybe we could be more clear around X, Y, or Z. Do other states have that kind of language in their statutes? And you hopefully will more easily be able to find those examples.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Thank you. Folks from the subcommittee, questions for Elliot or Leonie? Let's see, we've got a hand up over here. KC, I'm not sure who that is.
It's Michael.
Oh, thank you, Michael. Okay, so we now have a quorum as well then. Yeah, Michael, can you go ahead? Thanks and welcome.
Yeah, I've actually been here the whole time, Emily. I didn't realize that you needed me for a quorum, or that I was just showing up as Casey. I can't figure out how to get my camera to work, so you can't see my face. Sorry about that.
Sorry about that myself.
I don't actually have a question for LPRO. Honestly, I just raised my hand because I wanted to thank them for this work and say this is one of like the most incredible and I think potentially useful documents that I've ever seen in this area. I can't wait to spend more time with it and digest it a little bit more, but you know, just it's already clear to me that there are some ways in which Oregon is an outlier, both in good and in bad ways. And I think this is going to be extremely helpful to us as we figure out where we can borrow from to make our laws better. So just thank you. That's really all I wanted to say.
Great. Hey, it's Friday night, Michael. You know, you can spend your Friday night with 1,000 pages of laws. Since that's your field. Let's see who else has hands up. Senator Thatcher.
Thank you, and I do apologize. I'm going to have to leave in about 15 minutes or so. But yes, thank you. I think we're all very thankful for this pile of policy ideas that we get to pick from and get our minds moving towards what might work the best. But it kind of pricked my mind a little bit when they said that there was a charge for providing electronic records. Do you remember what that was about? Was that to access a database? I mean, that seems kind of the opposite way that I would think we would want to go. We would want to and I'll give you some time to look at that, but it just feels like I feel like Oregon needs to do more to make things more available online, and we should not be charging more for that. So I would hope that is not a direction we want to go, but maybe there's something else to it that I'm not recognizing. So maybe if you recall what that was about, Melissa or Elliot, I'd appreciate your input. Thanks.
So page 13, 14 talk about that category. And the electronic access to data is a couple of things. It's around, so for example, New Mexico, public bodies can charge a fee for the actual costs associated with transmitting copies by mail, electronic mail, or facsimile. So they can charge for sending it by email. Washington State has a 5 cents per each 4 electronic files or attachment uploaded to email, cloud-based data storage service, or other means of electronic delivery. So so there's sort of 2 pieces, right? There's the providing it electronically, and then there are actually electronic access fees. So Virginia is an example where they can allow a fee for the cost of making that data available, including, and this sometimes gets a little blurry with the category around doing additional data or information analysis. But for example, in Virginia, the language is around including the additional cost of computer runtime, any necessary analysis and programming, and the production of the report provided to the requester. I do recall another state, which I isn't listed in the memo, where they actually had language around charging a fee for someone to access data electronically. But I don't recall which one that was.
Interesting.
And similarly, I don't recall which state it was, but there is a state out there that allowed to embed in fees charged an amortized cost of the actual infrastructure required to provide electronic materials.
Do either of you happen to recall, and I don't expect you to by any means, but whether these were states that whether there was any connection between these kinds of charges and commercial requests, or whether these were in states where they had clear, waivers for the public interest? That's where I would that's where I would take my investigation into this would be that, because there could be some potential rationale there, but I don't know if that I know you didn't have time to, or it was impossible because of the scale of this to do any kind of cross analysis like that, but I don't know if anything popped up.
I don't recall, and we didn't do those, let's look at the tables of states that do X versus Y and see what that crosswalk is. There are a number of states that have different, whether fees are allowed or not allowed depends on whether it's a commercial activity or commercial use, right? So there are some differences there. And I would say, I think in general, if some of these specific fees are allowed, they're generally more allowed and authorized for commercial uses as opposed to those non-commercial, right? I don't have that crosswalk, but my impression from having looked at all of them is that they're just much more common. They're more commonly charged for commercial purposes. But in some states, sort of like Oregon, it doesn't make a distinction between the use necessarily, other than a general public interest waiver or fee reduction that may or may not be defined in statute as to how much of a reduction that might be.
And similarly, statutes don't always or regularly define what is meant by commercial use. So they'll use the word commercial in the statute, but don't necessarily let you know what is a commercial use.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks for pointing that out. Sharing your ear prick, Senator Thatcher. Let's see, Mark has his hand up. You want to go ahead, Mark?
Thank you, Emily. And at the outset, I want to thank Senator Thatcher for not only requesting this, but for delivering it to us all. I had the opportunity to skim through it last night, and I didn't really have a question, although if I did have a question, it was Senator Thatcher's question. So thank you for asking that, Senator, and thank you for requesting this report, because I do find it somewhat encouraging that Oregon's public records law does seem to cover most of these larger topics, although perhaps not to the detail that we all might prefer, right? And so I think it's going to be very interesting putting and looking at some of these states and their sort of ways at cracking a nut that may be different than Oregon's. And so this has been very informative. Melissa and Elliot, I just wanted to compliment you. This was a very, very thorough report, recognizing that you couldn't really make policy choices, but I think you really laid out the real fundamental issues in a very understandable and clear, concise, and thorough manner. I just wanted to compliment you on this report. Thank you, and thank Senator Thatcher. And I just want to point out, we do have a couple new pending PRAC members. And I think it's important to point out that Senator Thatcher is the architect of Oregon's transparency website. She created this transparency. She's rolling her eyes, so she doesn't like compliments, but she is responsible. And I think it's important for our members to have that background and understanding that she really has been a champion for public disclosure and sharing information with the public. So again, thank you to Melissa Elliott and Senator Thatcher for this report. I think it's really going to be helpful. And I just wanted to extend my appreciation to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And yes, thank you for beginning to bring our new members up to speed. As the chair of the PRAC, I'm sure you have a lot, and who's been in it since the beginning, along with Senator Thatcher, I'm sure you have a lot more insight to offer to everybody who's coming on board. Todd, you have your hand up.
I do. Okay, I could actually be heard too. Oh yes, Melissa Elliott, thank you. I'm deeply appreciative of your work, both its content and its presentation. And please extend our thanks to anyone in your office who also participated in its creation, because we know this was a heavy lift, and we're grateful to have this information. I do have a couple questions related to it. The first is when you talk about DC's open records law, is that the same as the federal FOIA, or does DC have its own unique system?
DC has a equivalent to a state law for the city itself. So FOIA, the federal law, was not included in this memo. This is all state and, in the case of DC, city statute.
Okay, thanks. I wasn't sure because of their unique setup if they just follow the federal law. Well, then I don't think my second question can be answered here. I'll throw it out there anyway, just in case maybe you know it. But I certainly understand if you don't, which is for this, to the extent that you were able to notice amongst the states that do have a tiered fee system, say for commercial and other types of requesters, do they generally follow the federal FOIA, or do they sort of range the gamut of like what types of tiers are out there? I'm just curious how they've broken up amongst the states, because certainly Oregon doesn't do that.
I'm certainly happy to let Melissa contribute if she has something more than what I'm about to say, but as far as I recall, the fee structures that are in place, which are kind of established, these are often per page fees. So it's either a standard black and white page of a certain size costs X amount, or up to a certain number of pages, each page costs X amount, or something of that nature. A lot of the authority to charge fees is left for the implementation of that authority. So it doesn't necessarily specify in statute how the fees are structured or tiered that I'm remembering off the top of my head. And I did not look specifically into comparing the state statutes to FOIA, so I can't speak to that comparison either. But Melissa, do you remember anything more than that?
I don't. And I think, Elliot, you've covered it.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from members of the subcommittee? We have on our agenda a public comment period now, and I would like to open it up if anyone from the public has a comment about this specifically, and then we can amend the agenda to talk about the future steps if other folks don't have questions. But is there anybody from the public who'd like to make a comment at this point in the meeting? Please raise your hand or open up your mic and say something if you do. Okay, seeing no hands, hearing no sounds, I will assume that that's no one has a comment at this time. I know we're going to pour over this extensively as we move forward, and I just really want to reiterate everyone's on behalf of the subcommittee and the whole council, although I might be overstepping a bit, but to thank you, Senator, really for doing this request and for seeing it through, and to Melissa and Elliot. It's really great. I mean, it's just great to have this sort of at our fingertips and this kind of summary. So yay, thank you. I know it's a ton of work. And I'd like to make a motion to add a couple items to the agenda moving forward. I mentioned these at the beginning. One was to introduce our nominated members, which we have already done. So we're going to do that. But I'd like to just amend the agenda to add an item of discussing what we're going to do next as we wrap up the testimony period and sort of information gathering period of this effort to revise look at the costs of records here. So yeah, I'd like to propose that we spend the rest of the meeting, it probably won't take the whole meeting, but talking about that and amend the agenda to that. Can I get a second on that?
Second.
Okay, great. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so that's a new
Aye.
agenda item. So I have been thinking about this, what we're going to do going forward, and being very, cognizant of deadlines if we're hoping to meet our goal that the whole council gave us to try to put some proposals together for potential legislation to offer for consideration in the 2023 session. And Mark's been kind enough to keep the calendar front and center, and so I'm going to ask him to fill us in on some dates in just a minute. But my hope is to finish up testimony. I think I've put an email out to everybody on the subcommittee over this week, looking for a date for a meeting that, we've been scheduled every 3 weeks, right, since December, and looking for a meeting time in June, either 3 weeks or potentially 4 weeks from now, to be able to hold potentially hear from a couple more witnesses on a subject that came up in the past meetings, that's looking at ways that a couple of states have in place to deal with large volume repeat requesters. Well, one was Connecticut, I believe the other was Texas, and Steve Suo has been working to see if, and Todd as well, working to see if some people might be available to join us. So I'd like to see if we can, if we can get that date finalized, and then I'd like to propose that we, if we can, once we find that date, we also spend some of the time, we come back to that meeting with our ideas of what we'd like to, what's risen to the top for each of us individually over the course of this information gathering, and try to start putting some thoughts together as how to move forward in more specificity as we get toward writing, potential legislation. So I'd like to ask Mark to talk to both dates and some specific thoughts he had about how to move forward logistically with that goal. Mark, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you, Emily. So folks, we have a deadline of September 23 to get legislation drafted for pre-filing for the 23 legislative session. And for those of you who don't know what that means, I'm sorry for those of you who do. I'm just going to try to walk you a little bit through the process as clearly as I can. Pre-filing a bill, what that means is that it goes into Legislative Council. They'll do their magic in the black box that is Legislative Council, and I say that in all good manner. What happens is Legislative Council then sends those drafts back to the requester, which is usually a representative or senator or the governor's office for review, and then they're sent back to Legislative Council. What this basically does is allow for a bill to be printed and ready to go the first day session begins. And typically what that means is the bill gets referred to a committee and then can be heard and worked upon. I think it's going to be in our best interest to try to meet that September 23 deadline with the hope and understanding that either Senator Thatcher or Representative Power will use their ability to request a bill on behalf of our council. My concern is this, folks. This is a big issue, and we're going to need a lot of time to work on something that hopefully we can send to Legislative Council in its most complete form. What I fear is that we would introduce a bill with a rather large relating clause that doesn't have much specificity, and then that bill goes to the legislature, and there are 90 members who all are going to have their own thoughts, ideas, and dreams about what should happen with this bill with a broad relating clause. I don't think that's in our interest, folks. Rather, I think that we need to try to get to some form of consensus, and I know that that might be a challenge, but it's our goal here to try to reach a consensus on how to address these in Oregon's public records law. As a result of that, I have suggested to the chair of the subcommittee, Emily, and also to Todd, that we need a straw man that we can work from to begin to organize our thoughts. And I've asked Emily and Todd whether they think that this is the appropriate way to go, and we thought we would put this before the subcommittee for their consideration. I think it's going to be important. The reason why I think Todd is the best individual is he's the most neutral party on the entire council, as well as Senator Thatcher. She's leaving now. Goodbye. So my hope is that we as a group can agree to having Todd make a first cut at a proposal that we can all begin to work from. But before he does that, as Emily suggested at our next meeting of this subcommittee, that those subcommittee members, and frankly, other members of the PRAC who may not be serving on this subcommittee, are certainly welcome to join as well, to bring their top issues, top concerns, top hopes and dreams, if you will, to a discussion that hopefully, or maybe not, can be incorporated into the product that Todd works on. This way, I think we can begin to really delve into a product that gives us enough time to discuss amongst ourselves, and also hopefully gives time for the public to comment on as well, which I think is going to be a very important component of the process that we're undertaking here. Understanding that we only have until September 3rd, that's a lot of stuff to get done in what may seem like a large amount of time, but frankly, it is not. So that's the approach that I've suggested to Emily and Todd. We wanted to have a discussion with the subcommittee as to whether the members of the subcommittee are comfortable with this approach and to provide any thoughts. So with that, Madam Co-Chair, or Madam Chair, I should say, I'll zip it and see what folks have to say.
Great, thank you, Mark, and thank you really so much for being being the time clock here. As far as the calendar year goes, Michael, you've got your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I wonder, like you, Mark, I think this is a very short time frame. Like 4 months does not even sound like a lot of time to me, honestly. It sounds like a short amount of time, and I know it will only actually be shorter. But I wonder if you guys have given any thought to the idea of a placeholder bill. And I know you have concerns about the relating clause. I don't really think I share those entirely with you, but I think a relating clause and a placeholder is still something that could be overcome. In other words, like the strategy of having a place for a bill, even if our conversations are going to take us well past September on the first.
If I can respond, Emily.
Please.
Michael, I completely agree with you. I mean, I'm being Pollyannish perhaps in thinking that we can do this in 4 months, and I agree with you. It's an extraordinarily steep mountain to climb. I think ideally, if we were to, ideally, we would come to a consensus on some reforms by September. I agree with you that that's probably going to be difficult, and we may very well end up having to do exactly what I hope we can avoid doing. But if it gets to that, Michael, I agree with you 100%. We need a vehicle, and we need we will likely need more time to come to a consensus, if we can reach a consensus at all, frankly. So there is still time built into this for us to continue discussions even after September. And quite honestly, we could continue it even into legislative session. Ideally, though, I think we would all agree that trying to reach a final product by September, late September, is ideal, although it's a tough road to hoe.
Michael, can I just ask you, with that in mind, and like, you know, listening to Mark's response, and like, you know, reality may set in, but would, in your mind, would recognizing the potential need for a placeholder bill affect, like, would that affect the schedule? Because we would try to move on in the next 4 months, which, you know, it'll take some work over the next 4 months. But if we go into it thinking, oh, we're going to have a placeholder bill, you know, does that affect, in your mind, like, do we go slower in the summer, or do you feel like let's press ahead and just keep it in reserve, just recognize that possibility?
No, I don't really think we should slow down. Maybe I'm just more of a pessimist than you guys. Like, I think it's more than a possibility. It feels to me like a probability that we're going to need one. And yeah, I have no issue with the idea that we should set that as a goal, to have, you know, come up with something that the members ultimately vote to support and pursue that. But I don't know. I just I'm very skeptical that it'll actually be done by September, and just wanted to make sure that we weren't going to have the plan sort of fall apart if we didn't get done by September, because it seemed like we might need more time, and this seemed like a way to potentially have more time if we need it. But it sounds like you guys were already sort of thinking about it and just sort of holding it in the back pocket as a part to play if eventuality comes.
Michael, let me phrase it in this manner. This is September 23rd is purely aspirational and a goal that we should target. I'm not fooling myself. I tend to be a half empty guy myself, but I'm trying to be optimistic. But this process that I sort of outlined does take into account that, look, we may still have 4 months of additional discussions, and would absolutely include the notion of, if we do not reach a consensus by September 23rd, that we get a placeholder in so that the discussions can continue. So I think that what you're suggesting and what I'm suggesting very much dovetail with one another. And I think that it would work fine. I agree, it's an ambitious schedule, but you know, nothing gets done unless you've got some ambition. So what the heck, right?
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said, Mark. Thanks.
Yeah, let's go forward, eyes wide open, and you know, hopes and ambitions sky high. So we'll see what we can do with that. The second part, you know, the specifics of your proposal, Mark, was that Todd take on the effort of drafting a first go round after we all get a couple of weeks and then reconvene and bring back, you know, some ideas and maybe even some sort of value guidance, right? Sort of like, at least maybe we could get a consensus of what we're exactly trying to do here. There's a complication, of course, there's a tension between focus, simplicity, and the naughty interconnectedness of many things. Once you open the fee box, as we've heard about fees as a tool to make requests better. We've heard people dealing with it in all kinds of different ways. So there may be some intrinsically related items that come up, but maybe we could at least get some priorities from people, some maybe common values that we're going for. But this tangible piece of having the public records advocate, take some time from and his workload to put that draft legislation together. And I'd love to hear from Todd whether you think I agree with Mark that you're in a unique position to do that, as this is, the focus of your work. But broadly speaking, you are a very expert in this subject, and you are, very skilled at seeing all sides, all experiences in the process of requesting and providing public records. But what's realistic, Todd?
I think I can realistically pull together a draft, and my greatest concern, it's going to take time and it'll be complicated, and I'm sure stuff will get missed and have to be addressed as we proceed. My greatest concern is adequately capturing and embodying our goals. And I know that it's in and of itself will be a work in progress, but to the extent that we can set me on as sure a path as possible to begin, at least with this general sense of what we all like. For instance, do we still want fees, or are we totally in favor of getting rid of fees across the board? Basic questions like that need to be answered. If we can do that, I can write something for us, and it'll be a starting point for us to chew on and build on from there with input from the public and any other stakeholders who would like to participate.
Okay. And, you also have resources, of course, on the PRAC, right? So if you can think of ways that we can be useful to you, that would be great. So, gosh, now it gets down to the brass tacks of timing. Let's see, I guess this is something we've got a quorum, right? Emily, Todd, Michael, Mark, that's all of our subcommittee current members. So that's 4. So we've got a quorum. So should we approve this as a plan? Do we even need to? I'm never sure what needs to be approved and what doesn't, but one of you experts on that, can you guide me?
I think we can probably approve it as a plan when we have something we're asking Todd to write. I feel like that can be all sort of done together, but
Yeah, what if we just agree that at the next meeting, we're going to come up with shared values and use that as our springboard to then make a motion for next steps, which we assume is me writing a draft.
That sounds great. And let's say shared values, and also asking all the members to bring their top priorities, which I think are a little bit different than shared values, right? So we'll have a discussion on that.
Well, sorry, I was just going to say, yeah, it's kind of to Mark's point earlier about, needing to compromise, and we're all going to have to like work together to get this done. We may need some straight votes about aspects of what we want to change, and we have to decide, do we want a majority, supermajority? We don't have any rules in place for anything like this, but this is the point where like the rubber meets the road. We have to have something concrete to start working on, and we're not all going to agree. So we may have to do like line item votes next time on these values and issues or items that we want in this bill to move forward.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Todd. I've been just sorry, I'm going to chime in here. Thankfully, it's only 2:01. I've served on the PRAC since its inception, and I want to say that for the time that I've been on it, we have worked almost exclusively from a consensus basis, which I really value and I cherish, because this is difficult stuff, and getting all the various stakeholders to agree to something is a Herculean effort sometimes. This topic right here, I think, is where we may lose the ability to have that consensus moving forward. That's my biggest fear. Ideally, of course, we would reach a consensus, but this is tough stuff, and there's some very hard and very ingrained feelings about some of these issues. So I'm not kidding myself in believing that we'll be able to reach a consensus. I hope that we can be as near to one as humanly possible. That's certainly my goal. But I know that it's very likely we will get on a few topics where we're going to have to take some hard votes, right? And unfortunately, there are going to be some on the winning side and some on the losing side. But I want to remind everybody that I think we're all committed to making Oregon's public records law fair and transparent for all users, and I'm committed to that. I know the rest of you are. I think that if we all come with open hearts and good intentions, we can get close. So hopefully we likely will have some deviations through this process that are perhaps uncharacteristic of past deliberations. But this is we're really finally getting into the hard work that this group was set up to after 5 years. And so now the rubber's going to hit the road. And I do agree with you, Todd, that sort of the consensus model that I've tried and strived to keep likely will break down in this discussion. And I want to be sure that folks know of that in advance. But if there is a way to reach consensus, I'm interested in trying to pursue that every chance we can. So thank you for raising that, Todd. But I do believe that we're all here generally for the same reasons, although we will all have our parochial issues to deal with. So thanks again, Todd.
Thank you, Todd, and thank you, Mark. I want to speak to consensus for a minute. It's a very important piece of the discussion process to reach meaningful shared ground and bills that can pass. And in my experience, I've been trained in conflict mediation and studied consensus in various forms through my work as a journalist. And I appreciate what you're saying, both of you, is sometimes when you come down to very difficult issues, a vote, drawing the line seems like the only way to get through. And sometimes it may be. The consequences of votes versus the consequences of consensus, they're different. And in my learning, one of the biggest ways to continue to try to reach consensus as much as you can is to try to reach consensus as much as you can, because when you do have the back pocket of, well, we're going to pull this one out for a vote, that is a already undermining potentially the commitment. Now, there might be ways that we just can't get around consensus, get around issues, and we can't find common ground, and we agree that, okay, we're going to vote on this one. But the whole point of consensus is that you keep working at it until you agree, because consensus is a give and take. Consensus means stepping back and seeing the bigger picture. And this council was constructed in a very careful way, so very specific interests are represented. And I think it does a great job of covering, really the people who are heavily involved on a regular basis with public records. But that's what consensus actually is. It's a commitment to see the bigger picture and to see the other side. So I applaud everyone's speaking to the desire to keep going in that way, and let's certainly start out in that direction and kind of bear that bigger picture in mind. And we know we want to get stuff done too, so we'll keep that in mind as well. I think as far as practical stuff, we do need a meeting date to do both of these things, to come with our priorities, establish some guiding principles, and formally set Todd off on his mission. Let's see, I had put out an email before I move on to that. Does anybody else want to weigh in on process, just in this sort of philosophical vein as we go forward? No. Okay. So dates, getting practical. So I sent out an email to the subcommittee members looking at what would be our 3 weeks from now, which would be June 3rd. We do have a full PRAC meeting on June 2nd. So that's like 2 days in a row of big long meetings about public records. And I know, many of us are doing this voluntarily, and then obviously it's everyone's busy. So there's also the other alternative dates I suggested, just to spread this out a bit, were the following week, June 10th, or the following Thursday, June 9th. And I just want to urge, if folks can get back to me in email. I've heard from some of you, but not all yet. Let's see, I think there's a few so if you could get back to me in email, maybe we could fix that date sooner rather than later. And I will confer with Steve to see, what's going on with those potential witnesses as well, or expert testimony as well. But
hey, Emily, I'm sorry. Could you mentioned June 9th and June 10th? What was the first date that you had mentioned? I'm sorry.
Friday the 3rd, and the times that I offered. So Friday the 3rd, Thursday the 9th, and Friday the 10th. And the time slots I offered were just the 1 to 3, which has worked well for us on Fridays. Thursday is an open question, but.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure I had blocked out those dates and times before somebody else tried to grab them from me. So thank you.
Good. Thanks. Yeah. And so I'll look to follow up to the folks I haven't heard from in email and get that going. Do any other council members have more business for today?
I just wanted to let everyone know the report from LPRO is now posted on the PRAC page under today's meeting.
Oh, look at you, Speedy. Thank you.
Well, I'm still benefiting from the service of Secretary of State's IT department, which will not be for much longer. So,
well, great, good for you, Speedy, Secretary of State's IT department. Thank you, and thank you for using those tools to get that up right now. Anybody else on the council, on the subcommittee, have any business items to bring up? Okay, any members of the public want to chime in here on anything that that you've, from today's meeting, or anything else you'd like to bring up? If you do, please raise your hand or say something. Miles has posted in the chat that June 3rd is the last of the June legislative days. Yes, that is another potential obstacle. So thanks for pointing that out. Appreciate that. Okay, anybody else have anything they'd like to share in this subcommittee meeting right now. I have one more question, actually, just as far as resources go, Todd, as we're reviewing, the weeks of expertise we've heard from. I see that recording and transcription have started when I look at the message from this meeting. Are there actually transcripts of these meeting already available or that could be made available?
So it turns out there are. And I honestly wasn't aware of that for a little while, but it came up as part of my transition from SOS, Secretary of State, to DES support services. And so they will get posted. I actually need to go back and proof them all. But they will. It does look like we will be able to start posting the transcripts as well as the video.
How far back do they go? Do you know, like all the way back to our first panel in December?
No, I haven't had the opportunity to go through them yet, so I'm not certain as of yet.
Okay. This is interesting. Correcting transcripts takes time and it's a delay. I wonder what it would be like, what the consequences would be, or the precedent, if there would be pros and cons to posting the transcripts with a large disclaimer at the top that says this transcript is not the official record of this meeting. If you want to know what someone actually said, go review the video. In the interest of perhaps making them available sooner rather than later.
No, that's not a bad idea. I'm also, I haven't engaged with DES in this process yet of even posting videos. Like, for instance, when this recording is done, I have to go dig through my emails and find out what the new process is for even getting this video to them. So I will be happy to follow up with the transcripts after that. I like that idea of getting them up as the unofficial record of this meeting. That'll just complement the video, which is the official record.
Yeah, that might be useful because it's hard to watch, 2 hours when you would just really like to know where the 10 minutes is of the thing that you want to actually know. So anyway, I offer that for consideration and I'll leave that to your discretion. But appreciate all the work you're doing on making that stuff available. Anything else from anyone on the subcommittee? Can I have a motion to adjourn early?
So moved.
Any second?
I'll second.
Okay, do we have a vote? Let's see, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Have a good weekend, everybody.
For a good weekend. Take care, everyone. Bye.
To everyone, thanks.